Good morning to you. Hope you're having a fantastic day today. Today is, where I sit at least, the 30th, 30 November 2022. This is the SitRep for today. The SitRep, which is not really a SitRep. This is, we're jumping back over to Kyiv. We're getting back on the Kyiv bandwagon and seeing what our old mate Timothy is up to on the ground in Kyiv, how he's operating. I am obviously away for work, so I'm in a hotel room yet again and struggling to find all my stuff on my computer here. There we go. There's most of the stuff. All right, I'll hopefully get this in the right order. Thank you for joining me from wherever you are. If you're joining me on the Instagrams, on the YouTubes, or whether you're listening to me a bit later on the audio version, thank you very much. I appreciate it. Appreciate your time that you're handing over to me to have a yarn about stuff and things. Rough night of sleep, getting the caffeine into me, so my headspace is at least somewhat human. We'll see how we go. I have to read words off the screen. And if you've ever listened to this before, you'll know that me speaking in England good'em. Sometimes I struggle when I'm tired. But hey, that's not what this is about. This is about listening to this person's story here, what they're putting up on Twitter. So I've had one of my sources send me 3 feeds or threads about what's going on here with, let me catch this dude's name, Timothy Milovanov. There we go. Timothy Milovanov. So he actually gives us a little bit of background, which my source who originally started sending me these threads did give me, and I haven't really passed that on. So this is day 5 after the last attacks we had, the Russian attacks on Ukraine, which knocked out the power. So he's living in Kyiv and trying to figure out how to live and work without power. If you haven't caught any of these little ones before, I think this is part 4, maybe part 5. I think part 4. That I've done, at least, of these little stories. And I'm finding it fascinating because this is somebody who's not a prepper in any way, shape, or form. They do not know, they haven't really thought about prepping outside of kind of your normal sort of stuff. They live in an apartment, is a professor. This is someone who, is probably upper, sort of upper middle class to lower upper class. When it comes to income, I'm assuming they seem to have means to purchase things, but living in an apartment in a city, working in a university, how they're dealing with their life, how they're continuing life on. So anyway, I'll just start off here. Day 5 of the latest Russian attack on Kyiv, day 277 of the war. I am president of the Kyiv School of Economics and, a former Minister of Economy of Ukraine and a professor of economics at the University of Pittsburgh. So this person actually was teaching at Pittsburgh in the US and left to come back to Kyiv. I think they said apparently 4 days before the war. Yeah, 4 days before the war. Sorry, Instagram, I'm going to move you off to the side because I can't read my stories otherwise. So he's basically come back from Pittsburgh from on a sabbatical, but into a war zone and is dealing with it now. Teaching at the KSE, the Kyiv School of Economics, throughout this war. He does hold a green card, which means he can leave Ukraine at any moment, but not everyone can. And that's interesting. That's a little fun fact, because that did come up in the news, and I was thinking about that. Like, A, how is this person not being drawn into military service? And B, can they leave if they want? And this story comes up a bit later in one of his threads about somebody trying to leave Ukraine. So he's kind of talking about here getting more prepared for another attack. The Russians have a tendency to do attacks on Mondays. So I think he's talking here from Sunday perspective. So the information I'm going on here is Sunday and Monday, their time. So he starts to talk about gear that they've been buying up, and he's got photos and things like that, and videos of him shopping at the malls and stuff like, all that sort of stuff. We've got our super warm winter hiking clothing out. Many people suggest that we can sleep in a tent in our bedroom. So this actually came up in one of the chats, I think, on YouTube the other day when we were talking about it. Him being cold within his domicile there. He's struggling to keep the apartment warm. This is actually something you can do. You can create smaller spaces within a big space. So if you have a big space and it is very cold, bringing something in like a little camping tent and setting up inside that means that you can heat that area, that smaller area, a lot more efficiently, a lot quicker than you can a large room. Most houses, and certainly within Australia, we're pretty bad for this. They're not very efficient in the way we cool or heat them. Australians are starting to change now, but if you've got a house that's probably over 5 years old, 10 years old maybe, woefully inefficient in heating and cooling. We just rely on energy. We rely on air conditioning to do it most of the time. Australia, for most of Australia, we're worried more about heat than we are about the cold. Me, where I live, worried about both. Heat in certain parts of the year and freezing cold in others. But yeah, when you actually start to think about this, how are you going to heat an area? So I think he's spot on here. Digging out sleeping bags, getting the tent. He's going to have to go buy a tent because he doesn't own one. But making sure you get a smaller space. But you can do this you can create sort of like blanket forts. You can certainly with windows and stuff like that, anywhere where there's gaps, doorways and things like that, you can hang things over like blankets to stop drafts and stuff like that coming in. These are all ways that you can heat or kind of passively heat an area. So interesting that he's cottoning onto this because he's obviously reading the comments and what people are saying to his story here, and people are giving him a lot of good information here. There are people who are probably a bit more preparedness minded who are typing in stuff or leaving comments on there, and he's taking it on board. The shops were open and it was Black Friday, everything on sale. But when we were about to pay, the electricity went off. So this comes back to, I think it was the first thread where he was talking about it's very hard to pay for things right now because there's no electricity. And all the FPOS machines require electricity to run. So cash is kind of king. And he talked about that in the first thread that I cottoned on to with him, where he was talking about going and getting cash. Clearly, he didn't learn that lesson because he's struggling again. But the shop had battery power or backup power at least, so it continued to run. They're using Christmas lights in the shops to save electricity. And he puts up a photo. It actually looks kind of nice. Christmas lights up, oddly enough. Many people suggest that when the electricity and heating go out, we use candles or gas/kerosene heaters to warm the apartment. We decided against it. So this is some of the stories or some of the things he was talking about, and I saw this posted in there. People talking about setting up little candles underneath ceramic pots, and what that actually does is the candle will heat up the ceramic pot, and then that will put out heat from those little flower pots. Pretty good idea. One thing you do have to think about if you're doing larger scale sort of stuff, burning anything, is the fumes and the buildup of carbon monoxide and stuff like that within a smaller space. So you need to think about that. So he has talked about that. He does know that that's an option. He's said here, oh yeah, we've thought about it, but we're not going to do it. First off, it's not too safe for novices. So he is fully admitting his shortfalls here in the understanding of what's going on, which I can't blame him for. People can come unstuck doing this sort of stuff. Second, there's none on the market to buy. So he couldn't find any. He couldn't find any kerosene or gas heaters in which to buy. Unsurprising with the conditions that are going on there, that people would have bought them up already. They drove to another store. So we drove to another store to get at least some wood and coal. The plan is to use a simple and small firewood oven that we can set up on our own balcony if all else fails. How do you drive when there are no lights in the city? That is, no traffic lights. Traffic police came out. My respect to them, he says. I read that and I found that super weird at first and super annoying. Not annoying, just like, have you never driven without lights, like as in street lights on? You know, your car has lights, right? You can turn them on. This is just it's an example of somebody who is very much a city-bound animal. Like where I drive, there's never any lights. You know, in a rural town, like maybe the main street's lit up at night, but most of the places, like half the streets aren't lit up. And then if you go out and you're driving outside of that area, you're not going to get anything like that. The other thing you've got here is traffic lights, and again, this is like, well, have you not driven anywhere without traffic lights before? You know, I get that maybe my experience of driving is a little bit outside of what a lot of people's are, but I've driven in heaps of countries where there are no traffic lights, or there are traffic lights and they're utterly ignored by everyone. Like it's more of a suggestion, really, if you feel like paying attention to it, but people are just going through everywhere. I understand how much this can cause chaos, but this is one of those sort of common sense things of like, okay, well, who rocked up here first? Who should be going? How much traffic is actually around? It was at night. He does have photos and videos up of it. There is a little bit of traffic, but I'm looking at it going like, it's not that much. It's, you know, again, maybe I'm being harsh because I've driven in very different countries. Like I drove through Kabul for years in a 4-ton armored vehicle, up-armored vehicle. So I guess once you're driving at that standard, everything else is seen as pretty easy. But interesting stuff there that he's dealing with, just going through what life's like on the ground, driving around, and just gives us pause to think about that too. Like, oh yeah, how would I drive? How would I act? You know, how would I change my driving to the conditions that were going on there? So went and got this firewood. Thought they were going to practice this. Here's a super interesting comment again, and I'm going to harp in on this one today because I caught the tail end. I was obviously driven into the big smoke to work the last couple of days, and I caught the tail end of some of these sales. And as soon as I finished work, I ducked in and I had 5 minutes left, and I picked up some gym equipment, from a home gym. If you've ever heard me rant on about this before, fitness, I think, is such a super important thing, that we work on our personal fitness, or our personal capability, really, is how I think of it. What can I do? It gives us more options in a survival situation, in an emergency situation, in everyday life. It just gives us more options. So, yeah, I was stoked to get out and grab some last minute deals, I guess, on some of that stuff yesterday. But coming back to this, we wanted to try the firewood idea just to practice when we got home, but we got exhausted bringing all the stuff to the 8th floor. This is not the first time he's talked about this. He is struggling to lift equipment up to the 8th floor where he lives. So we will try another time. Yeah, eight floors. I'll say, like, full respect, 8 floors with a heavy load. That's pretty hard yakka to do, but I don't think that should be beyond people to do. And especially not when it comes to something like, oh, I want to heat myself. I want to have, like, what does fire provide? It provides heat for us. It provides the ability to warm or cook food. It provides morale, and especially in a situation like that, it is super important. So yeah, and you know, heat is one of those fundamental things, I would say, if you're talking about the big 5 survival things, when we go shelter, water, food, heat and or fire, and security. Like, these are the big 5 as far as I'm concerned. So it should be something that's maybe prioritized a little bit. Sorry, I haven't been keeping up with the YouTube chat here, Peter Rouse. But the way I've set things up, it's very difficult to read. I'll just... Peter Rouse says, I assume he has a small gas cooker now, hot water bottle. Says, I've driven in Ukraine. At best, the drivers are horrible. I don't think anyone... there's very few places I've been in the world where they put their hands up and say, yeah, our drivers are great. Everyone thinks their drivers are horrible, wherever they are. And hill sprints would have helped him. I couldn't agree more. Hill sprints are a fantastic exercise. Yeah, you don't need to go out and buy fitness equipment, by the way. That's just my shtick. I love lifting in particular. And there's a few other things that I like doing, like sled pushes, jumping up on things. So that's why I go and buy equipment, kettlebell stuff. But your body weight is more than enough for you to actually get fit and in condition for an emergency like this. All right, so back to priorities. We said fire, not so much of a priority. What is his priority here? Yet my wife wanted some tea anyway, and also she wanted to get hot water for the morning, so asked me to start the generator so she can use the electric teapot. Again, sometimes when I'm talking to people about survival situations, I always bring it back to some form of mindset, because mindset, I think, is the most fundamental part. Mindset, then physical conditioning, then knowledge and skills, then gear and equipment. When we're talking about, like, from this perspective here, you're looking at it going like, oh, I want a cup of tea. Tea requires electricity because that's the way I've always done it. So I need electricity, which means I need the gear. And he continues talking about stuff like this, the gear. That's the way a lot of people look at survival. They're looking at it from the outside in, and they're going, okay, gear, that's what I need to get first. When really, I find that a little bit back to front. We need to think about mindset first. Part of mindset is going, okay, well, can I fathom possibilities or a world where things go wrong? If I can, then at least a part of my brain, if I know that something could go wrong at some stage, has a little plan for it. And can start to prepare for it. I'm like, oh, what if the electricity gets shut off? Well, I've got a gas cooker. I can do that. Oh, wait, I can start a fire. So I've got lighters and things like that. Oh, wait, actually, I can start a fire using friction. Like, that's the kind of like steps that I'm looking at for this. So it's fascinating to me. Again, this whole thing is fascinating. And I'm very, very grateful for this person putting this information out, because it allows us into the mind of somebody who is not a prepper, who is going through a prepper situation. And so you can see they're looking at it from that angle. They're going like, oh shit, we need hot water because we want tea. Well, we need electricity. And the other thing is, like, then going through the issues of actually getting a cup of tea. You see how hard it is, how difficult it is to get something as simple as a cup of tea into your hand, because this goes on. Peter Rouse says, lesson here, get out of the cities. Like, I couldn't agree more. Like, don't live in cities, don't live in apartments. But people do. I understand that's your life, that's your choice of what you've done. And that's cool, like, if that's what you want to do. But you can prepare for these things as well. Wants to get a cup of tea. I did, and I discovered, so he's starting the generator. I did and discovered another problem. The snow on the balcony has melted and the generator was sliding towards the window because of vibration. I need a way to fix it in place, but that's for tomorrow. Anyway, the water is boiled and stored in thermoses, which you went and bought. Great idea. We have 2 1 liter each. Perhaps we should get even more. Great idea. Here's a little interesting thing too. I was watching this on a recent YouTube video from Canadian Prepper, who I recommend. A lot of people call him quite doom and gloom, but I think he's just a sensible dude, and I like his videos. Anyway, Canadian Prepper, he was talking about keeping things warm, and he looked in the back of his car, and he opened. He was going through stuff, and he goes, "Oh, and here's what in Australia we would call an esky, or New Zealanders would call a chili bin." I don't know what they're actually called, but things you put ice in and then you put beers in them, right? And they keep it cold. So your Yetis and stuff like that. I mean, they work both ways. You can put hot stuff in there and seal that up, and it keeps the cold from getting in there as well. So just as a little thought there as well, you can fill thermoses, and then you can put thermoses in Eskies or Yetis or whatever, or chili bins, whatever you want to call it, and that's going to extend the amount of time that those things retain heat. That just popped into my mind then. I just just a fun little fact for us all. He also says we can probably order them and get them delivered, which I thought was really interesting. And he shows a pic of a delivery man on a bike, and he said this is about 90 minutes before curfew, and this is the blur of someone on a bike delivering something. He's got a big yellow backpack, so I think maybe food. But you can still get stuff delivered. So there's a private service. He said public services work here too. There is a tractor still shoveling snow on a sidewalk. So there's stuff still happening. And I like to point that out, as always. There is continuance of life. It's not like everything stops and everything goes crazy. So things are still happening. The mall looked normal too, except for the occasional blinking light. There's shortage of products in electrical and heating departments, and occasional assignments by managers to their staff to remember to start generators for the night. There was even a sushi restaurant, a good one, he says. Super fascinating. I wouldn't be eating sushi right now, but hey, you go for it. Peter Rouse says even foam shipping boxes lined with a space blanket will work. Absolutely. So those space blankets are really, really good at keeping things cool or warm or whatever you need to do with them. In the morning, we checked out a center of Neslemnost. These are shelters where people can get warm, get some tea, access internet, and power their devices. So these are little hubs that are set up for people. And it's just like, I look at this as like a little morale hub, like an electricity hub for people who don't know how to live without electricity. There's even, they're set up the internet through Starlinks as well. So that's an interesting little side point for me. As you all may know, if you've ever listened to me, I experiment with the Starlink experiment as well. So I'm always fascinated to see how it works in different places. But this is a super interesting thing. I'm not going to continue on with his thread here because he just goes into donation stuff and talking about that kind of stuff. But really interesting little thing where you can go and get a tea, internet access, power your devices and stuff like that, and get warm as well. Because people are going to get cold. Like, it's going to get colder here, and people are going to hurt. If people, and I assume here, because I've never been to Ukraine, I've never been to Kyiv, but I assume Kyiv probably follows the model of most cities that I've been to. In fact, like, I go to cities around the world. I've been to, I can't count how many cities around the world, like major cities, and they vary by degrees. They're not all that different. I don't find them all that different. I find countryside, like the actual country, the cultures and things like that, very different. But the city themselves, people within a city, I find relatively homogenized around the world. So I would imagine that most people in Kyiv are probably more like Timothy here than Bear Grylls. And so when it gets colder, things are going to get harder for them. Renee C says, people complain about electricity being off for a couple of hours here. Tell me about it. I mean, people complain about electricity being off for an hour where I live, and it's a rural town, and I find people in my town generally more hardy than a lot of other parts, like especially cities and stuff like that. I'm an hour away from a city, and so when I come into the city, I'm always like, look at the difference between the two people of a small rural town, and city folk, and how much more robust I find the town folk. But they'll still whinge at the drop of a hat, like, oh, there's no power and I can't watch Netflix tonight. I don't know what to do. All right. Where are we up to? 24 minutes. I do have to shoot through this now, gang, because I do have to get going. in a little bit to get to work. All right, this is thread 2. Good morning, day 278. It is morning. It's Monday in Ukraine. As I said in another tweet, Russians tend to bomb us on Mondays. Also, other days happen too. Okay, so they bomb us whenever. So should I go to work or stay home? I always go. Every day, often weekends too. But today I did not sleep well. You and me both, brother. The neighbors upstairs played loud music all night. I barely slept 2 to 3 hours. Why would you do this? Before the war, I would get angry and maybe call them. Or wait, passively aggressively. I just want to put this out for people out there. Don't be passive aggressive. Be passive or be aggressive. Do not mix those two things. I don't think that's a good state of being for anyone. I hate passive aggressive behavior. I hate it. If you're passive aggressive to me, I will be aggressive back most times. Being angry at them and myself for not having courage to confront them. My first thought was that they are away and their music system was left on, so it will continue playing every time we have electricity. Yes, we had it this night and thus heating. Around 7 a.m., it suddenly stopped, but electricity stayed on, and now I am puzzled. I tried to get another hour of sleep, but there is always drama. So this is the interesting part that I found where he's talking about people getting outside of the country. Our KSE CEO, Mike, called. There was trouble with our researcher, Taras, as he was crossing Ukrainian border. As you know, males are not allowed to leave Ukraine. That is without a permit. Taras has to travel to London this week. There is a meeting in preparation for Ukrainian youth reform/recovery conference next year. This year it is in Lugano. Next year it will be in the UK. KSE does a lot of work for the government on recovery and reforms, blah, blah, blah. So he explains how you travel from Kyiv to London. One day by train from Kyiv to Chelm, then transfer to Warsaw, then a flight. It takes about 40 to 50 hours door to door. The government has issued Taras a permit, this person who's traveling, but the officials at the border could not find the permit in the system and took Taras off the train. He called the CEO called Timothy, woke him up, adrenaline obviously in the morning where he was trying to get some sleep after a rough night's sleep. He called and wrote to the ministry who issued the permit and several friends and colleagues in the government. The bureaucracy started moving. I called Taras to tell him the good news so he can sit tight and wait for a bit of resolution. He said, the train is departing, thank you, but it's too late. I told him to run to the officers and demand to put him back on the train, and also send him the info, who the government is, the people who are looking into it. 5 minutes later, Taras called back and said that he managed to get on the train in time. So some good news for him this morning. But this whole thing I just found fascinating, that like this is the sort of stuff that you don't think about, and you don't see this on regular news or anything. Just this one person, one individual or male trying to get out of the country, and what happened there, dragged off a train saying that you can't get out of the country, your permits haven't gone through, the slow-moving beast that is bureaucracy, that is inevitably going to mess with your life, and how it's working against him here. Again, just an interesting insight into life in this area of the world at the moment. He goes on to talk about how he is heading into university today, despite what he sees as the risks of missiles possibly hitting the city in the next couple of hours. And then again talks about donating. All right. I have one more thread, but I'm going to maybe save that one for tomorrow. Yeah, probably tomorrow, I think. So tomorrow morning I might jump on and finish that one off, because I'm going to have to disappear into the ether now. That is go do work. So thank you very much for joining me again. I really appreciate it. Hopefully you pick something out of today's little catch up with Timothy over in Kyiv. I am still getting a lot out of this. I find it, as I said before, super fascinating and really good lessons for us all in this. There are things that he does that I'm like, oh yeah, how would I do that? Or I haven't really thought about that. I mean, I don't live in an apartment in a war-torn country, but that aside, there are still lessons that I think can be learned from Timothy here. So interesting stuff. I will continue doing this, and I will intersperse other news bursts or normal sit reps in and around Timothy's story, as long as it continues being of worth to us all. And I believe it still is. So yeah, thank you very much for joining me today. As always, I really appreciate it. Thanks very much for everyone who's been sending through stuff, messages and the like. As always, I love reading those sorts of things, whatever you've got. If you've got nothing better to do today, then get yourself out into the garden. Start growing your own food. I'm going to continue saying it. You'll probably get sick of it, but I'm not going to give up on saying that. And I'm not going to give up on us being autonomous, self-reliant, and responsible human beings who grow our own food. That's the future that I envisage for us all. Apart from that, though, I hope you're staying safe wherever you are in the world. And until next time, gang, Semper Paratus.